Well, thank you for joining me for this Alumni Connections conversation. If you just want to start by introducing yourself, give your name and when you finished up at Michigan, and a little bit about what you're up to now.
Sure. My name is Melissa Johnson, and I use she, her pronouns. And I defended in December of 2018, which I think is the last time I saw you.
Yep.
And I filed in January of 2019, and my degree was conferred in May of 2019. So for people who are planning to use that grace period when they're filing, that's sort of how it goes. And in terms of what I'm doing now, I know this is usually the shortest part of your interview, but I actually need to tell you a little bit of a story in order to explain how I got where I am. So when I defended and filed, my student loans came due immediately. I actually got my first student loan statement before I filed because I had already used my grace period after my master's degree, which I did elsewhere. And I also immediately had to start paying for my health insurance, which up till then I had been getting through the University of Michigan. So I needed income. I needed income right away. And I'd been living on my savings and on my credit card for the last 2 years because I had run out of funding. So I started initially looking for a non-academic job that would get me through until the academic job market started. And I applied for dozens of jobs. I did informational interviews. I worked all of my networks and connections, and I didn't get a single interview. And what I was told in all of my informational interviews was, we won't hire you for an entry-level position because you have a PhD. And we won't hire you for anything else because you don't have specific experience. So I was applying for jobs that were things I had done before, right? Things I had done before my PhD, but the PhD sort of negates all of that prior experience. So I started doing some freelance editing work and indexing work, which were things I had done before my PhD. And that, brought in a little bit of money until I was able to use my connections to get a couple of adjunct positions. So in fall of 2019, I had the summer where I wasn't really working at all. And then in fall of 2019, I started adjuncting at a college that's about 90 minutes away from me. And that was the only job I could get. So I was teaching a 9 a.m. class, 90 minutes away, twice a week, and then teaching just the one class. And then in the following winter quarter, I was able to pick up another class at a college near me. So I was teaching at those two colleges. And I've continued doing that since then. In my first year as an adjunct, I taught 7 new preps at 2 different schools.
Just hearing you, I'm getting whoa. So it's very overwhelming.
It is. And I want to really stress that being a GSI is a really great experience, and it was incredibly valuable for me. Teaching your own new prep is nothing like being a GSI. I did not take a single day off, including weekends, for I think it was 7 months, something like that. But I've sort of settled into a rhythm where I'm teaching one course per school at the 2 schools. And then I'm also continuing to index and edit as sort of a sideline, and applying for jobs, applying for both academic and non-academic jobs. So I sort of devote 1 day a week or so to job applications. And as we all know, the academic job market didn't really exist this year. So that's where I'm at. I'm very much in a state of flux. Adjuncting is not a permanent job, but it's what I'm able to do right now to pay my bills, and I can live on it right now because I'm able to live with family So that's a really long-winded story.
Not that long. It probably feels long.
It feels long, and it felt long in the doing.
Of course,
Yeah.
I was just about to say, like, the time taken to tell the story probably does not adequately reflect the like twists and turns of what it felt to live that.
Yeah, and it. I think a lot of us have the idea that there will be sort of this linear trajectory, right? I'll finish my PhD and I'll get an academic job, and and things will sort of fall into place in this tidy little line. And that has not been my experience. That's the experience that some people have, but for me, it's been very twisty and turny, and a lot of ups and downs, and a lot of anxiety, a lot of insecurity, financial insecurity, personal insecurity. We invest so much in our research and our teaching, and we want to believe that it matters. And it's very difficult to go out into a world that doesn't see any value in it.
For sure. And I'm currently in the program, and you cultivate this whole identity around your research and, introduce yourself, and it's your research area, or what year you are in the program. And that can be very all consuming, even when you're in it. So yeah, all that just affirm, what you're saying. It feels strange to just move on to the next question.
That's okay.
Okay. So when did you start the program at Michigan?
I started in 2010.
Okay.
And I was, oh no, I'm doing math. I was 33 when I started. So I was older than I think the average grad student. And then I finished in 2019 when I was 41. So that adds a sort of wrinkle to my story, in that the choices that you have are constrained by your life situation, right? And things that are acceptable at 25 or 30 look really different on the side of 40. I'm 40 years old. I have no retirement. I don't own a house. I have a lot of student debt. And I didn't have the option of hanging out on the market for a few years to see what happened without making some money somehow. And I think we don't talk about that enough. I think we don't talk about those sort of nuts and bolts realities of, trying to live your life while also trying to have a career like this. And this expectation that we can go on the market multiple times is sort of a given at this point, but doesn't take into account people who have other financial responsibilities, including families.
For sure. I think there is this expectation that we just like absorb that insecurity, and like it's a luxury to go on the market multiple times and be like, well, I'll try again next round. A luxury that I think, we all know exists, but don't name it because it's so uncomfortable. So I think you're exactly
uncomfortable,
right.
and I am uncomfortable talking about it, but I made a decision when we agreed to have this conversation that I want to be really honest about what this really looks like. Not just this vague sort of, adjuncting is hard, but the reality of it is that it is very scary, especially if you don't have a lot of other resources, which I don't. And I think we need to acknowledge that. I think we need to not be afraid to talk about it, because for people coming up in the program now, it's going to get harder, right? I think that this whole past year and what that's done to higher ed budgets is going to make it harder. And I think we need to be able to talk with each other about what this really is.
I think you're exactly right. And it's one of the reasons why, we haven't seen each other in real life in a long time, but we're connected on social media. And it was one of the reasons why I really wanted us to connect, because I really appreciate your transparency kind of around what life after the PhD is like. And that's just what I see through this like very, clouded lens of social media. And so when I was thinking of alumni, I wanted to connect with you work on my short list. So I'm really glad that you agreed and are willing to be honest. I think it's something, I really wanted to hear from you. So I assume other grad students would benefit from it as well.
And I wanted to thank you too for asking me, because so often the alumni stories or the post PhD stories that we hear are things that can be termed success stories, right? People who got the tenure track job, or people who got an alt-act job that they really love. That happens. Of course that happens. And I'm really happy for people that have that experience, but there are a lot of people for whom that's not the experience. And I am proud of the work that I do. I believe that it matters. I still believe my research matters. I believe that my teaching matters deeply. But nobody's going to call me a success because I don't fit into that sort of story that we tell, that sort of two-track story. Either you get a tenure track job or you find some other thing that is fulfilling and wonderful and makes you complete, right? And there are more stories than that.
Yeah, and I know this goes beyond COVID times, but I think right now, just getting through the day is a success story. So that's kind of how I see it in this moment.
That's absolutely what I tell my students.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's also what I need to hear. I was doing my progress report, which we do yearly. And I'm like, I want to type, I made it through the year. And I think that's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I think that that's really important to keep in perspective this year, but also in non-COVID times, right? That, I started this journey before COVID started. I was adjuncting in face-to-face classes, and actually it was winter term of 2020. Our finals week was in March, and I remember getting the email saying, "Don't hold your finals in person, hold them online." Right. So I had already been doing this and sort of went through the transition as an adjunct. But even before COVID started, sometimes getting through the day was the best I could do. And I don't say that to be dramatic, like this isn't some sort of sob story. But when you're doing that kind of workload for so little money and wondering if any of it means anything, like some days you just have to put one foot in front of the other, get out of bed, put on your pants, and show up. And do you want to talk about money?
Sure, we can, if that's something that as alumni looking back, you're like, we should talk about this. I would value your perspective.
I think we should talk about money. It's something that I've really come to believe very strongly, that we hide a host of sins by feeling awkward about it. So
let's talk about money.
So I'm just going to tell you how much I make.
Okay.
I can't be super specific, in part because the numbers fluctuate a bit. But generally speaking, at each of the schools where I teach, I am paid about $2,500 for a class for the term. So teaching 2 classes per quarter, I'm making $5,000 per quarter. There are 4 quarters in a year. I made more as a GSI. I would make more as I actually looked it up before I got on this call. I would make more as a custodian at the college where I teach. And that's really important, valuable, dignified work, but you don't need a PhD to do it. And so I just want people to know that's the kind of like dollar amount we're looking at. I do not get any kind of benefits. There's no retirement, there's no health insurance. I pay for my parking. I pay for my own computer. I provide my own office space at home, even before COVID. I provide all of my own supplies. I buy all of my own books. I store all of my own books. I don't have an office on campus where I can keep my shelves of books, so I have to have a place to keep them. So, so it goes beyond just the salary level, right? There are a lot of things that we don't think about that are employer provided that we don't get as adjuncts. This is all very gloomy. I'm sorry.
But it's also real. And, you know, of course, you're alumni of the program I'm currently a part of. But I think, as you well know and have spoken about before, like, this is part of a broader problem in academia, that we kind of, you know, it eats its own young.
Yeah, and I want to be very clear that I do not blame the program in any way. I don't regret going there. It is a systemic issue that I think everyone in higher ed needs to be involved in trying to fix. And that includes faculty at Michigan, and includes grad students at Michigan, and includes staff at Michigan, and also every other college and university across the country. It's a crisis, right? And it's not just a crisis for me because I don't have a full-time job. It's a crisis for our students. And if we let, I'm going to get really political for a second, okay? If we let people continue to tear down the humanities and social sciences and continue to devalue them, of course no one's going to stand up for us. Of course no one's going to stand up for the value that we bring, not just with our research, but in our classrooms every day. And so I don't think there's a way to be a responsible member of the higher education community and not get political about this.
I think you're exactly right.
I'll step down off my soapbox now.
No, I would join you on the soapbox. So
I'll start singing Solidarity Forever.
You know, faculty, grad students, admin, everyone, this is off of our question list, but what can we as grad students kind of think about, do right now to kind of look forward to this problem and try, you know, to do what we can in this moment? Obviously, we're not going to solve it, but, you know, contribute to it in a meaningful way, or try not to contribute to the problem, but contribute to the solution.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I can give you a sort of like global conceptual answer, and then a sort of like nuts and bolts answer. The big conceptual answer is actually something that I was going to mention. One of the questions that you asked me was, what do I wish I'd learned? And the number one thing I think grad students need to learn that they're not being taught is the business of the university. You need to know where the money comes from and where it goes. You need to know how it's allocated and who makes those decisions. And I know that at least I was sort of aware of it at Michigan, just in terms of like, where's the money for sports coming from versus where's the money for, you know, fixing the leak in the ceiling in Haven Hall coming, like, you know, you're sort of vaguely aware of it, but I mean, really dig in and find out how those budgets work, because you can't fix a problem that you don't understand. So, you know, budgets work differently at a place like Michigan than they do at a liberal arts college, and that's different than a community college or, you know, a smaller state institution like the University of Oregon. But figure out what those differences are, like make this part of your job, because if you're going to work in higher ed, the only way you can advocate for it is to know how it works. So that's my big sort of, you know, we're researchers, go do some research kind of argument. But in terms of like action items, I think we need to always consider what kind of power we do have we tend to focus so much on the power that we don't have, right? I personally can't increase the state budget for higher education, right? I can't personally force a school to hire more full-time tenure track lines, right? There are things I can do. Um, there's a bill being considered in my state legislature right now that would provide health insurance equivalent to full-time faculty health insurance for part-time faculty at a very small premium. So I called my rep, right? And I said, please support this bill. And he signed on as a co-sponsor. Like, that's a thing that I can do. And it has an immediate effect, right? If you're on a committee, advocate for hiring full-time faculty and staff, right? If we believe in diversity and equity, then we need to live those values by paying people a living wage. And that means not letting people do this without a fight, right? And it's hard. It's incredibly hard. You have a lot more protections at Michigan because of GEO than people have at other institutions where they can't collectively bargain. And I don't want to get you in trouble for talking too much about the union, but use that protection to advocate for people other than yourself, right? Because the system falls apart if we all just look out for ourselves. And I think that a lot of what happens is that we get so afraid, right? Because I need my job, right? I can't afford to risk my job. And that makes it very hard to speak out. And, so figure out what risks you're willing to take. And if you figure out the business of the university, then you know where you can step in and where maybe you need to step back, right? It helps you figure out how things work, the lines of authority, to figure out those moments when you can be an advocate. But y'all are grad students. And I think that we expect you to professionalize so much when you're still in grad school that you shouldn't take the weight of the world on your shoulders either, right? Don't expect that it's your job to fix this. It's not just your job, but what you can do is figure out how it works now so that when you are in a position with decision-making power, you can make those decisions in ways that benefit the most people.
Yeah, I think that is excellent insight, because figuring out how the money works, as you well know, when they're saying, is how power works, and what power do we have, if any, and how can we wield it in a responsible and ethical way. I mute myself when you're talking so that it doesn't get all this feedback, but you can't hear me being like, yep, like kind of just responding, but all throughout, I was tracking with you. So yeah. I think that's excellent insight, excellent advice.
I mean, just from like just as an example, like I can add up how many tuition dollars come in for one of my classes, right? I can say I have X number of students, they each pay Y dollars per credit hour. So I can figure out how much money my class is making, right? I can subtract my salary from that and figure out how many dollars are left over. Where do those dollars go, right? They go to things like infrastructure and paying custodians and paying staff members and paying presidents, and and like really think about this as a business, right? I think we become historians in part because we don't want to have anything to do with this stuff. And the bad news is that you don't get to opt out. This is the system we live in. So those are the kinds of things that you can do even as a grad student. Ask questions, poke around on HR websites, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that is very insightful, and also, I don't know how to phrase this, helps clarify the idea that you can just piece together a few different adjunct positions and have that be like a full-time job. I think that that's one misconception kind of outside of the PhD program. It's kind of almost become a parody, like a joke, like people in my family or people outside, like, oh, why don't you just, teach at all these places and it'll be like a full-time job. But the pay ratio, classes you teach, it doesn't make sense. And it makes sense to the business of the university, but not ethically, or the care of students, or the care of you as an individual. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up.
And the other thing is the cost in time and energy and all of those other sort of fuzzy, squishy things that comes along with having multiple email accounts, multiple employee ID numbers, multiple supervisors. Everything that I do, I have to do double. Every fire extinguisher training that's required for me to do every year, I have to do twice. Every sexual harassment training, I do twice, right? Because I have to do them at each institution. I can't keep an Outlook calendar that my students can use to schedule appointments with me because I have 2 Outlook calendars, one for each institution, right? And I can't integrate them. I have 2 Zoom accounts, right? I can't hold office hours simultaneously for both institutions because I can't be logged into both Zoom accounts at the same time. So I'm not just teaching those 2 classes. I'm actually doing more work than it would be to teach 2 classes at one institution because everything has to happen twice. So when people say that they teach at 3 or 4 or 5 different institutions, that's the invisible labor that's happening behind the scenes that we normalize as part of the cost of doing business.
I'm dumb as fuck. I'm speechless about that. I mean, it's like one of those things, like if you think about it, like, of course, there's no streamlined bureaucracy when you're at multiple institutions. But I mean, I know how the red tape at one institution can be. I'm mind blown just thinking about it.
I mean, if you want to hear more, it gets worse because I teach in 2 different states. So now I have 2 different, I have to file taxes in 2 different states. I have to, everything is double. And I have 2 parking stickers on my car, right? I mean, it's little things and big things that all add up to a consistent message that your time doesn't matter, right? Because that's all time that's not compensated. I'm only compensated for contact hours, which is time in the classroom. 4-credit class, I get paid 4 hours a week. I don't get paid for office hours. I don't get paid for prep time. I don't get paid for grading. I don't get paid for building my Canvas shell. I am on spring break right now. I graded finals until Sunday evening, posted my final grades. I have to have all of my online classes up and running a week from yesterday, right? So it's less than a week that I have for the break, which means I have to build those courses in 2 different learning management systems. I have one in Canvas and one in Blackboard. And this is my break. I'm not paid this week, but they have to be built, right? And so,
Right.
The schools will tell you that's built into the hourly sort of salary that I'm paid. That's what they'll tell you.
Yeah.
And I do want to say, to be very clear, I love my students.
I was just about to say you do all this work because you love your students and love your subject and want them to leave the classroom better than you found them, you know,
And
and
right. And I
yeah.
love my colleagues too. I work with
Hmm.
incredible people who
I
have
was going to
given
ask
me.
about the intellectual community. Like, what is the dynamic like for part-time faculty and full-time faculty? Like, do you feel that you can be part of that intellectual community, or does it feel like it's inaccessible because of all of these additional crushing layers?
It is challenging. And most of that is logistics. I don't
Okay.
have an office on campus, right? So
Right.
I'm not, and I'm talking about before COVID, right? I would not sort of regularly run into people in the hallways the way that, and we're all experiencing what that's like now, right? That like lack of physical proximity that gives us a lack of community. There's also the time crunch, right? One school might have some really cool event planned, a speaker or a workshop that I really want to attend, but I can't because I have a required meeting at my other campus, right? They're not coordinating their schedules around me. Um, so this is an awkward thing to say, and I don't say it lightly because of all of the things that are embedded in it, but I'm just imagining myself getting excoriated on Twitter for saying this. But in many ways, COVID was the best thing that happened to my intellectual community because everything went online. I'm not happy COVID happened, right? But I've been able to attend workshops and present my research, give public talks, visit people's classes, um, things that I never could have done. I mean, I've done talks in Virginia and Maine and Washington State, and and I couldn't have done that before. I don't have any travel funds. I don't get to go to conferences unless I can do it from here in my house, right? So I'm super, super ready for the pandemic to be over and for people to stop dying, right? But I'm really worried about what's going to happen to that accessibility for people like me and for people who have caring responsibilities and for people with disabilities who aren't able to take advantage of those opportunities when they have to be face to face. I have incredible colleagues who understand what it's like to be an adjunct, who will give me one of their classes if they know I don't have one. They take care of me as best they can. My students are amazing. I love them with my whole heart, and they are the reason I keep doing this. They they make me feel like I matter every single day. And that's the flip side of all of this angst, right? Is that this work matters so deeply to me. And the problem is that you can have individual colleagues who are terrific and individual supervisors or deans who are terrific. But if they're not working as a system to make the system better, then your experience is only as good as your worst colleague.
Yeah, that all makes sense. And it sounds like in the long term, it's just not sustainable for an individual, but it is sustainable for the institution,
Yes.
which is the problem. I mean, you know this, but like
Yeah, but
individuals,
that's a
yeah,
really key point, right? Is that they do this because it works for them. And this gets back to the importance of understanding the business of higher education. There's a reason that this works for them. That we have allowed it to become normal is a black mark against all of us. That we somehow think it's okay to value labor differently depending on full or part-time status makes no sense when you say it like that, right? So I don't know how much longer I can do this. You know, I want to teach forever. But the reality is that financially and emotionally, I have to set a limit. And I don't know what I'm going to do instead, right? If I get pushed out of this job, I don't know what happens instead. And I know that you all are getting a lot of advice about like a plan B, or, thinking about what happens if and when you don't get a tenure track job. And I tried to do that. But I want to acknowledge the pain that comes with that. When you've given your heart, when you've given your time, years of your life to something, walking away is, it will be one of the hardest things I've ever done. And just like I think we have to be honest about money, I think we have to be honest about that emotional cost.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It sounds like, it's kind of shelving part of yourself, part of like your very identity.
Well, I think that we spend so much time like cultivating that as our identity.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't know if it's possible to not do that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, getting a PhD is such an incredible privilege. At least it was for me. It was an incredible privilege to work with brilliant people and apprentice with some of the best historians in my field.
Mm-hmm.
And to have time, it never feels like you have time, right? But looking back on it, to have that time to think deeply and to read deeply, like it's such an incredible privilege. And savor that time, but also know that if you give everything you are to that, there will come a moment when you have to let it go, whether it's because you got a tenure track job that demands too much of your time to really invest in deep intellectual activity, or whether it's because you have to leave academia behind. So I hate myself for saying enjoy it while you're doing it, because like it's not enjoyable while you're doing it, right? It's awful. And I would have like smacked myself across the face if I had said that to myself when I was a grad student. But I do think, if it's not going to lead to a job, if it's not going to lead to a profession, it can at least lead to joy, right? And that's what I'm trying to hold on to now. But you do need a plan B. You need a better plan B than I had.
Well, and you say, I can't believe I'm saying this now, but that has been a consistent refrain from a lot of alumni, is like you can't see it when you're in it, but it is very valuable time. And maybe leaning into the uncertainty more so, and saying, I don't know, so I'm not going to invest all my time in trying to have the perfect CV because I don't know what's going to happen next.
And there is no such thing as a perfect CV.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if I can impress upon current grad students any one thing, it would be that don't damage your health or your relationships, your self-esteem, your wallet. Don't damage things trying to chase the perfect CV, because I can tell you that sometimes people get tenure track jobs with no publications and no teaching experience. And sometimes people get tenure track jobs with a book already published. And sometimes people have a book contract and articles that are placed in really great journals and teaching experience and public history experience, and they adjunct for 5 years and then get a different kind of job. Like it's not predictable. And people who tell you that it's predictable are trying to sell you something. So, whenever I talk about being a job market failure, I imagine people picking apart my CV and my grad school experience and looking at all the things that I did wrong. And I did so many things wrong. But I don't think that we should be punished for our worst choices in that way, right? I don't think that that making one mistake should doom us to poverty for the rest of our lives. And that's sort of the unspoken message in all of that is, if you didn't get a job, it's because you didn't do everything right and therefore you deserve to suffer. And please don't buy into that because you deserve better.
Yeah, I think that's excellent advice for current students, as we oftentimes, lament over the things we don't have time for, or I wish I could take that position or apply to that conference. Like, what if that's the one thing that would have made the difference? But that's never the case. It's never just, if you would have had X in your CV, you would have gotten the job, because the equation doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work that way. And I will tell you from experience, having made it to the final round of interviews multiple times and not gotten the job, trying to figure out what the thing was is a path to madness. Yeah. Was it because I said that thing? Or is it because my CV was in the wrong font? Or is it, you can drive yourself insane. And the real truth is that there is no way to know what it was. There's no way to know. And sometimes it's just that, they liked somebody else better, or somebody else's research fit better, or, somebody went to grad school with somebody else's advisor. Or, there are so many contingencies and exigencies on the market. No matter what happens, no matter what mistakes you made, it's not your fault. And I'm saying that for myself as much as for you.
I was just about to say, that's one of those things, you could print it out and put it on your wall and you'd still feel it every time.
Every time.
Every time. And, I guess all we can do is cultivate connections like this with people that can say well, what would you tell your friend in the program if they didn't get that job? You wouldn't be telling them your CV was probably in the wrong font, so treating yourself with the same kindness you would treat your grad school friends.
But I think also cultivating relationships with people who've been through this process is really important for your sanity. I know that I had people who were there for me, my first go on the market, who would talk me down from those ledges, right? Who would stop me in my tracks when I went down that path of, what's wrong with me? What's the matter with me? And they can also help you decide when it's time to go. And those are the kinds of conversations that it's really difficult to have with people outside of the academy, and also really difficult to have with people who won the lottery.
Absolutely.
And everyone's advisor at Michigan, the system worked for them, right? And that's not to say they didn't earn it.
Mm-hmm.
But if the only people that you talk to are people for whom the system worked, then it feels like the system makes sense. And you need people in your life who will say, no, this doesn't make sense. This is crazy. This thing that's happening to you is crazy, right? Yeah. And I don't use that word lightly. It's very difficult to be surrounded by success and try to make sense of your experience when it doesn't resemble that. So hang out with losers like me.
I think no matter how many times we see that graph of number of PhDs and number of jobs, it's really hard to see yourself or the people in that data. And no matter how many times we see it, it's different to talk to a human being that has a similar, grad school background and can say nope, and I'm still here and I'm still a person and I still love teaching. I have found that just in our time talking to be actually one of the encouraging things in the thick of all the angst, as you call it, that even through all this, you enjoy teaching. Because I am really happy to hear that isn't, ground to a pulp through this experience of adjuncting.
No, I mean, I think with any job, there's, and I mean, inside or outside of higher ed, there are things that you don't like. There's paperwork you don't want to do. There are, maybe people that you don't get along with, or things that frustrate you, right? You get tired of the emails, whatever. But the saving grace for me is that all goes away when I walk in the classroom, whether it's virtual or face-to-face. When I'm in that classroom, that's all there is, right? And it gives me hope and it gives me meaning. And it's, I said to a friend the other day, it's the only thing I've ever been good at in my whole miserable life. But that's, I think, what makes it so painful is that I feel more myself in the classroom than I do any other time. I feel more grounded in, like, deeply in who I am in the classroom than I do any other moment in my life. And sometimes we get the message that teaching isn't important and that what really matters is your research. And I love my research, and I could talk to you for another hour about my dissertation and my book revisions and the things that I'm working on and how much I love it. But there's no shame in liking teaching, right? There's no shame in, it doesn't make you less of a scholar. Do you know how much scholarship I do to teach? In the last year, I've taught world history, US history, and the history of the Vietnam War. I teach US history from, my classes range from pre-colonial up through World War I. World War I. My world history classes are medieval and early modern up through the present day. And then the history of the Vietnam War starts in the 19th century and goes up to the present. I was trained as an early Americanist. What you learn in a PhD program is how to teach yourself something really fast. If you ever wondered what prelims was for, which I did, that's what it's for, right? And so, surprise, you're teaching the history of the Vietnam War and it starts in 2 weeks. What are you going to do? You teach yourself. And I know how to do that because I was so well trained. And that's scholarship. And all of that work informs my own research. And, that's why we're scholar teachers. So, there is still joy in it for me. There is still meaning in it for me. And that is very difficult to reconcile with the daily experience of checking my bank balance.
Yeah, that feeling.
And I just want to acknowledge that that's a real thing, and that if people are feeling that, like, those feelings are real and legitimate, and don't ever listen to somebody who says you shouldn't feel however you're feeling about all of this, including grad school, including your dissertation, including all of it. Your feelings are valid.
And this feeling of, like, this is what I was born to do. Will someone please just let me do it? Like, what that must feel like on a day-to-day basis, but then still being able to find, like, the joy, like you said, you find the joy with your students. I think that that's really valuable, even if it is frankly sad and unsustainable in the long term.
It is sad. And it's not just sad for us, right? I mean, it's sad for me because I'd like to make more money, but it's also sad because I was a first generation college student. I was a non-traditional college student. And I believe so deeply in higher education, and particularly community colleges, which is where I'm teaching now and which is where I started. I believe in what they do with my whole heart. And devaluing the work of those institutions does them a disservice. You know, it's sad for me, it's sad for my students, it's sad for the staff and the librarians and the tutors and, you know, the counselors and all of the people who try to make the place work. We're chipping away at all of the expertise that could make it better. And that's hard.
Definitely. I can only hope that if enough individuals can see, you know, how this works, like you said, maybe make this power map of the institution. I can hope against the odds, you know, that it will eventually change in time, you know, for people like us to lean into what we're born to do.
Yeah,
in that way.
and I haven't given up on it, you know.
Yeah, of
And I
course.
still like there's still that little mustard seed of hope, right? That a job will appear for me. So I'm not saying all of this as somebody who's given up.
Mm-hmm.
Not for myself and not for higher ed as a thing. But I'm scared.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the more complacent we allow ourselves to be, the more we say that's someone else's problem, the scarier it gets.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just thinking about, you know, there's been a lot of talk about free community college in a proposed financial package being floated in Washington, D.C. right now. And, you know, are there going to be any provisions in that for the classes to be taught by full-time faculty? Like, this is a moment that we could make a real change. Will you call your senator? Will you call your congressperson? You know, we have to pay attention to what's happening on that broad scale if we're committed to saving it. And that's a big ask. It's a lot to do, right? And we all have a lot of other things going on. But I think if we're going to fix it, we have to commit to it, and nobody's going to save it for us.
Yeah, it's a big ask, but it's also a big deal with big ramifications, you know, if something were to change. So that circles back to, you know, what can we as grad students do? These things, which I know I needed to hear tonight. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't mean any of this to feel or sound overwhelming, because I think, you know, when I remember back to my grad school experience, it was just like the feeling of being overwhelmed all the time. Like that's what I remember, is just everything being too much all the time. And so I'm not trying to add another thing, right? This is one more thing that you need to do, stack it on your plate, you know. But do what you can, right? And find ways to help. There is, you'll probably have to edit this out, but there's the lecturers, the part-time faculty at Michigan have a union. Talk to them, find out how you can help them, right? Work in your own neighborhood if you can't think bigger than that. You know, talk to the people who are doing the work. Treat adjuncts like colleagues. Don't ignore them because you're afraid of being them. You know, that's a big problem. I've talked to friends who have been ignored in the faculty lounge because nobody, it's like you're contagious, right? And there's no mask that prevents adjuncting.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's, but also, like, while you're thinking about how to protect all of us, also think about how you can protect you, because all of that idealism is great until you need to pay the rent, right? And how are you going to do that? And so I just wanted to circle back a little bit to talk about what you can do now, things that I wish I had done then. And I'm going to tell you my experience from being on the job market for non-academic jobs or for academic adjacent jobs. You are not going to get a job without experience. There are too many experienced, smart people looking for work. I have applied for entry-level jobs, gotten interviews, and the job went to somebody with 10 years of experience for an entry-level job. So there are a lot of people who are going to tell you, all these employers want your skills. Your PhD is so valuable outside of the academy. And I would just caution you, if the people telling you that are people who've never had to do that, if they're people who've never had to go get a job with their PhD outside of the academy, take their advice with a grain of salt. And if an organization tells you so many people want your skills, and then that organization doesn't hire history PhDs, take it with a grain of salt. So the practical things you can do right now are to get experience that will help you get the kind of job you might want. And in order to do that, you have to look at the kind of jobs that are out there. Start looking at job boards, not just for professors. Look at non-instructional positions on the academic job boards. Look at things like Indeed.com. What kind of jobs look interesting to me? What are the things that they're looking for? And start accumulating those skills. When something says they want someone with project management experience, your dissertation does not count. Project management is a thing that has like software and jargon and they want somebody who knows all of that stuff. A lot of places want quantitative analysis experience. Yes, statistics. I didn't take it. I wish I had. They want specific experience that's legible to them. They're not interested in translating your experience. So don't wait. Don't be like me and wait until you finish and then say, oh, holy Jesus, what am I going to do now? Right? You have to start thinking now about what kinds of jobs are out there. And this is a huge lift, right? Because we want you to get all of this teaching experience and write a great dissertation and win fellowships and have publications and get public history experience and oh, by the way, spend lots of time figuring out what you would do instead. Like it's not okay what we're asking of grad students right now, but that's the reality of the situation. You have probably 2 years on the market if you're lucky. If you don't get a job in those 2 years, people will tell you just stick it out, try another year. It's really unlikely. So figure out now how you're going to pay your bills.
Yeah, I think while you're right, it is a big lift. It's also very future minded, thinking 10 years from now, not just 2 years from now, which is something we often don't do in grad school because we're just, like, oh, I won't be as busy next week.
You will always be as busy next
exactly.
week. I promise you that. But the other thing is that like I come from a working class background and much of my life was just sort of, I fell into things or I let life happen to me. The jobs that I had, the work that I did, I had no plan. I had no 5-year plan about how this job was going to lead to something else. I was just like waiting tables or whatever. It's a skill you have to cultivate. That skill of planning ahead and thinking about how one step leads to another. If you don't know how to do that, it's not your fault, right? It's just that you haven't practiced. Think about yourself the way that we think about our students. It's not that you don't know how to do it, it's that you don't know how to do it yet. So start practicing. Start making short and long-term goals. And I'm saying this as much for myself because I really need to improve this, but start thinking about what your life is going to look like when you finish and figure out what you want it to look like and make a plan for getting from here to there in a world that doesn't include a tenure track job. And then if you get a tenure track job, then, we all buy you champagne and it's great, but don't let it shock you and catch you off guard when it doesn't happen.
I think that that's kind of the only logical way forward right now. And I really appreciate you, sharing your experience in, very empathetic and useful for us right now way. So I want to respect your time. I said we would talk for an hour and it's been an hour. So I really appreciate the things you brought to the table. I think make a lot more sense than any pre-planned questions I could have sent along. But before we go, is there anything else we didn't talk about that you really feel like you wanted to talk about in this conversation or current grad students need to know that we haven't covered yet? Or just anything you want to say?
I mean, nothing comes to mind except first I want to apologize for ranting. It's been something of a week. But also I just want to reiterate something that I'm sure you hear all the time and it probably just washes over you because it's sort of vague and ill-defined, but please remember to take care of yourself. It's something that I didn't do well enough in grad school, and there are consequences to that. Taking care of yourself looks different for different people, right? It may mean making sure you go outside every day, or scheduling time to play with your cat or your kid. It looks different for different people, but please find a way now to prioritize that, because it's only going to get harder. And if you don't make it a habit, then not taking care of yourself will become a habit. And all of the things that I'm going through now, the good and the bad and the painful and the fun stuff too, all of that, I have to manage. And you learn how to do that in grad school. The patterns that you set in grad school are the patterns that you will bring with you afterward. And especially now with the job market the way that it is, and there's so much doom and gloom out there, and everyone looks at that AHA chart and feels their stomach drop along with that line. Don't ignore that, but also don't let it define you in ways that will hurt you. I want everyone to come out of grad school healthy and as happy as they can be, and feeling proud and capable. And too many people come out feeling beaten, and so separate from building your CV and doing all this research and writing sample syllabi and all of the things that we have to do to try to make the job market work for us. Also, just try to find ways to be happy and find joy in the world and find something that sustains you. That isn't this. I think
your whole point, part of your point here, that balancing, the sometimes grim reality with also the joy of opportunity is something you teach yourself and learn how to do. It isn't just something you wake up doing, which I really appreciate you making that point.
Especially grad students, I think that we tend to be very serious and self-critical and I'm running out of adjectives because it's been a long day. But no, I think that we tend to be pessimistic and self-critical people, and so that's a muscle that you have to build, right? And I'm not building any other muscles during COVID, so I'm working on that one.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you not only taking the time, but being so honest about your experiences and allowing us to learn from them. I don't think that should be undersold, that you're taking the time to do that for us. So thank you so much.
Oh, I'm happy to do it. I appreciate you asking me, and I'm happy to talk with anyone who sees themselves in my experience and feels like that would be a valuable thing. I'm happy to be a resource for anyone in the program.
Great. Thank you so much, Melissa.
You're welcome. Thank you.